My name is Clara, and if you're reading this, it means you've stumbled upon the story of how I went from being just another cog in a corporate machine to someone who decided she wasn't going to take it anymore. Not that I ever thought I'd end up here, writing about my life like some kind of cautionary tale or revenge fantasy, but here we are. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them, doesn't it? Let me start at the beginning because, honestly, that's where everything changed for me. Before all this chaos unfolded, I was your average mid-level employee at Crestwood Industries, one of those big corporations with shiny glass buildings and people walking around pretending they actually care about each other. I worked in marketing, not glamorous by any stretch, but I loved what I did. Or at least I used to. You see, before him, things weren't perfect, but they were manageable, predictable, safe. And then he walked into our lives. His name was Victor Langston, and oh boy, did he make an entrance. He came in as the new CEO after some high-profile scandal forced out the old leadership team. Details on that are still hazy even now. The board brought him in as their golden boy, fresh off turning around some failing tech startup no one had heard of until he made headlines. From day one, Victor carried himself like he owned the place, which technically I guess he did. But it wasn't just his confidence. It was the way he talked down to everyone, like we were all idiots wasting oxygen. I remember the first time he addressed us. It was supposed to be an inspiring speech, a rallying cry to take Crestwood to new heights. Instead, it felt more like a lecture on how none of us were smart enough to get the job done right. His words dripped with condescension, masking themselves as motivation. By the end of it, half the room looked ready to quit, and the other half seemed too stunned to move. I sat there gripping the edge of my chair, trying not to let his arrogance get under my skin. Spoiler alert, I failed miserably. The thing about Victor is that he didn't waste any time making enemies. Within weeks, he'd managed to alienate nearly every department head, fired 3 senior managers without warning, and implemented sweeping changes that left most of us scrambling to keep up. Meetings became war zones where only his opinions mattered. Anyone who dared disagree quickly learned to keep their mouths shut or face the consequences. And that brings me to the moment that changed everything. It happened during one of those infamous weekly strategy sessions. We were discussing a campaign proposal I had spent weeks working on, a campaign I genuinely believed could turn things around for Crestwood. It wasn't flashy or groundbreaking, but it was solid, data-driven, and built on real insights from our customer base. At least, I thought so until Victor tore it apart in front of everyone. This, he said, holding up my meticulously crafted presentation like it was a piece of trash, is exactly the kind of amateurish thinking that got this company into trouble in the first place. I froze, heat rising to my cheeks as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay calm. With respect, Mr. Langston, I began choosing my words carefully. The research supports these recommendations. If we implement them strategically, I think. You think, he interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. That's the problem, isn't it? You think. You don't know. You don't have the experience or the vision to understand what this company needs. Maybe you should take your stupid opinion elsewhere. The room fell silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Stupid. He called my opinion stupid. In front of everyone. Part of me wanted to shrink into my seat, to disappear and pretend it never happened. But another part, the part that had worked tirelessly for years, the part that believed in my ideas, refused to back down. Fine, I said, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. If that's what you want, I'll do exactly that. Victor smirked, clearly amused by my defiance. Good luck finding anyone else who'll listen to nonsense like this, he shot back, tossing my proposal onto the table like it was worthless. What happened next is something I can barely explain, even to myself. On paper, it sounds reckless, impulsive, maybe even insane. But in that moment, fueled by a mix of anger, humiliation, and sheer determination, I made a decision that would set off a chain reaction neither of us could have anticipated. After the meeting, I went straight to my desk, packed up my belongings, and handed in my resignation letter to HR. Well, not really a resignation letter. It was more of a polite note saying I'd be taking a temporary leave of absence. Technically, I still had 2 weeks' notice to give, but I couldn't bear the thought of staying in that toxic environment a minute longer than necessary. Besides, I had bigger plans. You might be wondering why I didn't just walk away entirely. Truthfully, part of me wanted to. But something about Victor's smug expression stuck with me. The way he dismissed me so casually, like I was nothing more than a nuisance to swat away. It lit a fire inside me, a burning desire to prove him wrong, to show him that my stupid opinion wasn't just valid, but valuable. So instead of disappearing quietly, I decided to take his advice literally. I took my ideas elsewhere. Not to another company, though. No, I aimed higher. Much higher. Over the next few days, I reached out to every contact I'd ever made in the industry. Former colleagues, mentors, competitors, even journalists. I pitched my campaign idea to anyone who would listen, tweaking it slightly to fit different audiences along the way. Some ignored me. Others laughed outright. But a handful saw potential. Enough to give me a platform. One of those people was Rachel Meyer, a freelance writer known for her scathing exposés on corporate corruption. She agreed to meet me for coffee, mostly out of curiosity. By the time we finished talking, she was intrigued, not just by my campaign concept, but by the story behind it. The rise of Victor Langston, the toxic culture at Crestwood, my own journey from loyal employee to disillusioned whistleblower. It was juicy stuff, the kind of narrative that sells papers and gets clicks. Rachel helped me craft an article detailing everything. The flawed strategies Victor was pushing, the internal resistance he faced, and the innovative solutions he refused to consider. We framed it as a critique of modern corporate leadership, using Crestwood as a case study. When it published, it blew up overnight. Suddenly, my name was everywhere. People were talking about me, not as the woman who got humiliated in a boardroom, but as the visionary marketer challenging the status quo. Of course, none of this went unnoticed by Crestwood. Victor hit the roof when he found out. He called me into his office, livid, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. "Do you have any idea what this could cost you?" he snarled, slamming a copy of the article onto his desk. "Your career will be over before it even starts." But here's the thing. I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Empowered, like I finally had control over my own destiny. So I looked him square in the eye and smiled. "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll go out knowing I stood up for something I believe in." That conversation marked the beginning of a whole new chapter. One filled with uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. Victor underestimated me, and now he was paying the price. Little did I know, though, that this was only the tip of the iceberg. Because while I may have started this journey seeking validation, I soon realized there was much more at stake than just proving a point. As the fallout from the article spread, cracks began to form within Crestwood itself. Employees who had been too scared to speak out before started coming forward with their own stories of mistreatment and mismanagement. Journalists dug deeper, uncovering skeletons in the company's closet that painted a far uglier picture than anyone expected. And through it all, I found myself at the center of a storm I hadn't fully anticipated. But amidst the chaos, one question lingered in the back of my mind. How far was I willing to go? Victor had ignited a fire in me, but now that fire threatened to consume everything, including myself. Could I handle the consequences of what I'd set in motion? Or would this quest for justice ultimately destroy me? The days following the publication of Rachel's article felt surreal. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls, texts, and emails from former colleagues offering support, industry peers congratulating me on my bold move, and even a few strangers who simply wanted to share their own horror stories about working under toxic leadership. It was overwhelming in the best and worst ways possible. For every person cheering me on, there was another whispering warnings about the risks I'd taken. And they weren't wrong. Victor wasn't the type to let something like this slide. Crestwood Industries might have been his kingdom, but he ruled it like a dictator, and no one crossed him without facing consequences. I knew retaliation was inevitable. It was only a matter of when and how brutal it would be. Still, I couldn't bring myself to regret what I'd done. Not yet. Things at Crestwood spiraled quickly after the article went viral. Employees who had once cowered in fear now found courage in numbers. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into outright complaints, and soon enough, an internal revolt began brewing. A group of mid-level managers drafted a letter outlining their grievances against Victor's leadership style, citing everything from micromanagement to discriminatory practices. They asked me to review it before sending it off to HR and the board of directors. Flattered but cautious, I agreed. As I read through the document late one night, sitting cross-legged on my couch with a cup of tea growing cold beside me, I realized just how deep the rot went. These weren't isolated incidents or exaggerated claims. They were systemic issues that had festered for years under layers of bureaucracy and denial. The more I read, the angrier I became, not just at Victor, but at myself for not seeing it sooner. How many signs had I ignored because I was too focused on climbing the ladder, too afraid to rock the boat? By the time I finished editing the letter, dawn was breaking outside my window. Exhausted but resolute, I hit send and leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. This was it. There was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, I'd played a role in setting it in motion. Victor's response came faster than anyone expected. He called an emergency town hall meeting the very next day, clearly hoping to regain control of the narrative. Walking into the conference room felt strange. It was the same space where he dismissed my ideas so cruelly just weeks earlier. Only this time, the energy was different. People sat upright, shoulders squared, eyes locked on him as if daring him to try and spin his way out of this mess. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and commanding despite the tension crackling in the air. "I'm sure you've all seen the recent developments surrounding our company. Let me assure you, Crestwood Industries remains committed to excellence, integrity, and innovation. Any claims otherwise are baseless attempts to undermine our success." He spoke for nearly an hour, deflecting blame onto unnamed, disgruntled employees and painting himself as a victim of a smear campaign. But his words rang hollow. Every jab at toxic workplace culture fell flat when delivered by the man who embodied it. By the end of his speech, the room was eerily quiet, no applause, no nods of agreement, just a sea of skeptical faces. When he opened the floor for questions, chaos erupted. Hands shot up across the room, each person eager to challenge him. One by one, they voiced their frustrations, the unrealistic deadlines, the lack of transparency, the favoritism. Victor tried to maintain his composure, but cracks began to show. His polished veneer slipped, revealing flashes of anger and desperation beneath. Finally, near the end of the session, someone asked the question everyone had been thinking. "What are you going to do about it?" Victor hesitated, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. Then, with forced calm, he replied, "Change starts at the top, and I can assure you, we're taking steps to address these concerns." It was a vague, meaningless answer, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. That single question, and his inability to provide a satisfactory response, sparked something unstoppable. Over the next few days, employees started organizing informal meetings to discuss next steps. Some suggested forming a union. Others proposed drafting a formal complaint to the board. A few even floated the idea of staging a walkout. I attended most of these gatherings, listening intently while trying to stay in the background. I didn't want to overshadow anyone else's voice, especially since this movement wasn't just about me anymore. Still, people kept looking to me for guidance, as if my experience somehow made me an expert in navigating corporate warfare. It was flattering, but also terrifying. Who was I to lead anyone? Just a few months ago, I'd been nothing more than another face in the crowd. Despite my reservations, I couldn't deny the sense of purpose I felt. For the first time in years, I wasn't just punching a clock or chasing promotions. I was fighting for something bigger than myself. And maybe, just maybe, I could make a difference. Meanwhile, the media circus surrounding Crestwood showed no signs of slowing down. Journalists camped outside the office building, snapping photos and hounding employees for comments. Headlines blared accusations of nepotism, financial mismanagement, and unethical business practices. Even competitors seized the opportunity to throw shade, releasing statements about their own commitment to ethical leadership. Amidst the chaos, Rachel reached out again. She'd uncovered some explosive new information about Victor's past, a pattern of similar controversies at previous companies he'd worked for. According to her sources, several lawsuits had been quietly settled out of court, allegations ranging from sexual harassment to embezzlement. If true, it would be the smoking gun we needed to take him down for good. But pursuing this line of attack came with its own set of risks. Digging into Victor's history meant opening old wounds and potentially making powerful enemies. Was I ready to go that far? To put myself directly in the crosshairs of someone who clearly had no qualms about destroying anyone who stood in his way, I spent hours agonizing over the decision, pacing my apartment and weighing the pros and cons. On one hand, exposing the truth could bring about real change, not just at Crestwood, but across the entire industry. On the other hand, it could ruin me, my career, my reputation, possibly even my safety. There was no guarantee things would work out in my favor. In the end, I decided to trust my gut. If there was even a chance to hold Victor accountable for his actions, I owed it to myself and to everyone else he'd hurt to try. So I met with Rachel, shared everything I knew, and gave her permission to publish whatever she found. It was a leap of faith, but sometimes faith is all you have. As the investigation unfolded, I threw myself into supporting the growing resistance within Crestwood. We held strategy sessions, brainstormed creative ways to keep the pressure on Victor, and rallied allies both inside and outside the company. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Employees who had once feared speaking up now wore their defiance like badges of honor. The atmosphere shifted from one of dread to one of cautious optimism. Yet, even as momentum built, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing with fire. Victor was cornered, and desperate men are dangerous. He stopped showing up to meetings, delegating tasks to his inner circle instead. Rumors circulated that he was planning a counterattack, though no one knew exactly what form it would take. One evening, as I left the office later than usual, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Its engine idled softly, the windows tinted too dark to see inside. My heart skipped a beat. Paranoia? Maybe. But given everything that had happened, I couldn't afford to dismiss it as coincidence. I quickened my pace, clutching my bag tightly as I headed toward the subway station. Just as I reached the entrance, my phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Clara," a low, gravelly voice said. "You've caused quite a stir." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" I demanded, glancing over my shoulder. The sedan was still there, unmoving. "You know who this is," the voice replied. "And you should know this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood frozen, staring at my phone as the implications sank in. Victor wasn't going to let this go quietly. Whatever happened next, it was going to get ugly. After weeks of mounting pressure, the board of directors finally intervened. Armed with Rachel's exposé and mounting evidence of Victor's misconduct, they launched a formal investigation. The findings were damning: financial improprieties, discriminatory practices, and a trail of settlements from his past roles. Victor was ousted from Crestwood in a dramatic boardroom showdown, his reputation left in tatters. With Victor gone, the company began to heal. Employees who had once lived in fear found their voices again, working together to rebuild a healthier workplace culture. Clara became an accidental hero, her courage inspiring others to stand up for themselves. She was offered a leadership role in the revamped marketing department, but declined, choosing instead to pursue her passion for advocacy by helping other workers fight toxic environments. In the end, Clara realized that her journey wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her power and proving that one person can make a difference. As she walked out of Crestwood's glass doors for the last time, she felt lighter, freer, and more hopeful than ever before. Sometimes justice has a way of finding you when you least expect it, and sometimes happiness is simply knowing you did the right thing.